Welcome to Cures and Capital, the podcast on value creation in biotech and pharma.
I'm Martin.
I'm Simon, and we are here with another episode, this time with Sheila Gujrathi, an MD, a biotech entrepreneur, investor, and executive with over 25 years in drug development and leadership across immunology and oncology and other areas. She's the executive chair of Ventyx Biosciences and Lila Biologics. She's a director at Janux Therapeutics and a co-founder and former CEO of Gossamer Bio. She's also a co-founder of the Biotech CEO Sisterhood. So, Martin, what can our listeners look forward to in this episode?
So we talk about bringing underrepresented voices into biopharma leadership, Sheila's upcoming book, The Mirror Effect, and what can our listeners and the readers of the book look forward to, and her vision for the next generation of not just female leaders in the industry. Before we go in, please subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts, as it helps us attract new guests. And as always, all views and opinions expressed in the podcast are our own and do not represent that of our employers.
Now, please welcome Sheila. Sheila, a warm welcome to the Cures and Capital podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here.
Thank you so much. But why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners?
I'm happy to. So my name is Sheila Gujrathi. I am a longtime biotech executive, serial entrepreneur, founder, investor. I am a clinician by background. I trained in internal medicine and allergy, immunology, rheumatology. I spent some time at McKinsey, and then I spent the first half of my career in larger companies. So I was at Genentech, large biotech, and I started in the commercial group, but I ended up moving into development, and then I was either the medical lead, development leader, or franchise leader for different programs in the immunology and oncology space. So running big program teams and doing just development strategy and trial execution across all stages of development. Then I had the opportunity to go to BMS and be the immunology therapeutic area head. So I oversaw all global clinical development for the whole immunology franchise and pipeline. We had late stage antibody programs and approved antibody programs and fusion protein programs. So it was Orencia, Nulogix, as well as IL-6, IL-31 directed therapies. And then that's when I also got exposed to small molecules. There was an excellent chemistry group at BMS. So we had a very large and impressive small molecule discovery pipeline that I was involved with overseeing. And then about 15 years ago, I moved to San Diego, and I've been in small emerging biotech companies ever since. I was the CEO of a company called Receptos, a chief medical officer. We took that company public, did several follow-on financings in the public market, and ended up selling to Celgene in 2015. Then I had an opportunity to co-found and be CEO of my own company, Gossamer Bio, which still has a phase 3 pulmonary hypertension asset that they're developing. And I've also done a lot of board work in my career. I did want to step into the board chair role because there's so few women chairs in our industry. Yeah. So now I've been a chairwoman of 6 different companies at different times. So I've had a lot of experience doing board director and board chair work. And I've gotten back into founding more companies and developing therapeutics, which is really my passion area. Another big, part of my career more recently has been around advocacy for women, advocacy for underrepresented groups and minority groups. So people of color, of course, I'm a woman of color, so that intersectionality. And so I co-founded the Biotech CEO Sisterhood. This was in the 2021 timeframe with Angie Yu and Julia Owens, and we're over 450 women CEOs right now, public and private, and we're also kicking off the CXO Sisterhoods, which I think has been just an amazing thing in our industry. And of course, I've been writing a book which is launching this fall, so I'm really happy to be at this moment.
Yeah, I think that was wow. That's quite a journey you've been through there, and I can see here because we are have video here. But if listeners are on the bike or out running, so you have your upcoming book here in the background, and it's called The Mirror Effect. I can clearly see that. And there's a lot of pink and purple on it, and there's a lot of themes there. We would love to unpack with you, but can you maybe briefly explain? And I know it's coming out on the 4th of November, if I'm not wrong. On Amazon, I checked it, and probably many other places. But could you briefly explain what is that? Why is it called The Mirror Effect, and what is that book about? And
Yes, thank you so much, Simon. So this is a book that I wish I had when I was really in starting out in my career, stepping into those executive leadership positions. I felt that there was really no playbook or manual of how to, really handle like the internal whatever was going on inside of us, as well as external situations, how to navigate these environments. And I would argue that women and maybe other underrepresented groups, we don't necessarily have the same networks of people who've been in those roles, and we don't have mirrors in terms of people who see us, hear us, understand us, or look like us, talk like us, think like us, that are in these boardrooms and in these review committees. So we feel quite even more alone and sometimes isolated. And I think that's been my personal experience. So I just reached this point, especially after I had played a lot of these roles, where I realized, wow, I wasn't necessarily fully prepared for what I was going into. Not that any one of us, is when we take on roles, as a lot of it is trial by fire when we walk into certain situations. But I do think, I could have been better prepared, and that was my intention to say, could I take all my lessons learned from my successes as well as from things that didn't go the way I had planned and put them into a book and kind of create more of a playbook or, really a helpful guide for women who are in our industry, my peers, the next generation of women leaders as well. And so that's what I set out to do. So I started writing. I have a whole framework that came to me fairly quickly when I started writing this. And then I had the opportunity to learn a lot through the Biotech CEO Sisterhood as well, through mentoring and sponsoring that I've been doing in my career for especially the last decade, I would say. And a lot of shared experiences. And actually, as I started sharing my own stories, I saw how helpful that was for other women. Like, oh, you went through that? It's not me.
Yeah.
I'm not alone. And I thought, wow, like light bulbs started going off, even for men. That just sharing and talking about these experiences, I call it real talk, and being more transparent takes up the stigma out of some of the things that we go through, which again are not that uncommon. But just talking about it, I think, has been incredibly helpful, so that people don't feel alone and isolated as they're going through these experiences. And then I had the opportunity to do my TED Talk last year, and I decided to focus it on the concept of mirrors. Again, mirrors are people who really do see us, hear us, understand us, reflect our brilliance, have our back. And when we're surrounded by mirrors, we just have so much confidence, and it can be very transformative because we finally feel seen and we feel like we belong. And that is just something that's truly game changing for me personally. I experienced that later in my career through the sisterhood and other organizations and communities I've built. But I understand the importance of that. There's also the component of holding up our own mirror and doing the inner work and raising awareness of what may be going on inside of us. Because I did realize that oftentimes I would be operating from a place of fear, where I really felt like I had to prove myself. And I was like striving and fighting versus just really being my authentic self. Even though I thought
Yeah.
I was, I wasn't actually aware of some of the inner dynamics that I was experiencing. So there's so many different aspects of the mirror effect that I think are just so beautiful, and that I can really talk about in the book. And when I'm out talking about talking to different groups in our communities about what this journey has been like, and hopefully being helpful to those around me.
Can you help me make it a little bit more practical, so to speak? So, I mean, you gave your overview of your career, and I think you're an accomplished biopharma executive. You made it. You've done all the cool stuff from, I mean, executive positions, board work. But now, could you recap some of that through the lens of being a female leader or a leader of color, and then that intersection of that? Also, and then maybe give some example. What does it actually mean in one particular meeting? I mean, is it what it's said or not said or done about? Can you explain it to us?
Yeah, it's a great question. I like this, like tell a story through that lens. I think that's great. So for example, even when I was in the academic setting, I had the opportunity to train at Brigham and Women's Hospital, an amazing Harvard hospital, phenomenal academic institution. And I remember when I first walked into Grand Rounds, and I looked up, and the walls are filled with portraits, of amazing clinical leaders and they were all white men. They literally all around me. I'm just looking around, and there are just all these pictures and beautiful portraits, and there is no one who remotely looks like me. And, you just kind of check in and you're like, oh, well, will I ever run a department, or will I ever be a senior leader in this ecosystem? And so, I think we're so comfortable being uncomfortable that we don't even recognize it. And I've actually worked in other women physician groups, and we talk about this. And, it's just something that, again, this is early on in my training. Fast forward, going into, Genentech and Bristol Myers Squibb, especially because then I went, from McKinsey and the commercial side, I've been back into research and development. And again, very few women leaders at the senior levels. So when you walk into these review committees, and then when I joined BMS, I was the only woman on the R&D leadership team. And I was the only person of color at that time. And then I was the only woman of color. So it was like only woman, only person of color, only woman of color. And so I think you just become very acutely aware of just that you are different, and again, you're used to it. So at the end of the day, we're talking about science and addressing unmet need and developing therapeutics and doing all of that work. But you do wonder, like, well, what is my career path in these organizations? Will I be able to rise up the corporate ladder? Is this level I'll be kind of stuck at, or what will it take for me to advance? And do I have any confidence that will actually happen? Those kind of thoughts do go through your mind when you don't see yourself reflected in any of the leadership roles, and the teams and the executive teams around you.
But I seem, and that seems almost like your own self-talk, of course, your own reflection on the outer world. And I think that's probably a big part also of the message you want to get across with your book. And I think the other part is also the external, the real effects, or where the door is actually closed in front of you, or how much is that internal dialogue, which is culture, or whatever it is, and the other is processes and how things are running in the companies.
Yeah, I think there's this dynamic, right? There's the inner dialogue, as you're mentioning. The first part, so my book, just to kind of talk about this, just because I think it's helpful for this conversation, my book is in a 3-part framework. Hold up your own mirror, know thyself, reflect on your surroundings and understand your environment, and then make a life worth mirroring and set yourself up for success, really building upon the first 2 sections. And so I start with ourselves, because it's important, I think, to start with yourself and understand what's going on in your mind. You have limiting thought patterns, beliefs, habits. Because I make the case, or, I try to make the case that women and people of color do have different conditioning. Some of us have had some traumatic experiences. I faced a lot of racism growing up in the United States. Just things that you just experience, and you don't even recognize how you've internalized that, and that has become part of your inner narrative. And so, but just kind of raising awareness of that and how to break free then of those limiting thought patterns, because if you're not operating from a centered, grounded, strong position in yourself, it's very difficult to even be objective in assessing your environment. So there's that piece, but then there's the understanding your environment, because what happens is that environment has played a big part of the inner dialogue that you have, because that influenced you. It's not like we were born and we're like, oh, I'm different. You don't think that way naturally. It's because you were told you were different, or you've had experiences of that nature, and that affects your inner self-talk. And then you show up in these environments, and then your inner self-talk is contributing into the way you show up. So there's this dynamic and interplay that occurs between the two, inner self, outer self, how you're showing up externally, what you're perceiving, how you're perceiving, what are the filters that you have to perceive that? Are you truly being as objective as you can be, or are you potentially being reactive? So that's why I talk about both in the book, and how they do affect one another. And I think it's important to kind of go through that, and then you can put it all together, and then understand, again, how to address your limiting thought. I call it the FIDS: fear, insecurity, doubt, and shame, and that inner critic, inner glass ceiling. break free of that so you can be your true, authentic, powerful self, and then go into those environments and then assess them. Because, it's reality. Sometimes we face difficult, challenging work environment, and we all deserve to work in, thriving, safe environments as well. But how do we assess that in the best possible way from an objective assessment? And then what do we do about it? And so that's kind of the interplay that I like to talk about. And to your point, sometimes it's difficult. You have to, it's like the red hot iron ball. You have to kind of tease out, what's from the heat, and what's from the material, and sort that out, and then assess things objectively and figure out what actions you want to take.
Sheila, can I have a question? Because you of course you talked about your book, right? The Mirror Effect. But I actually, when I started to Google, I noticed it's not just a book. There's also a workbook
Yes.
and a journal. And then I'm looking into it. Of course, there isn't too much information. It actually says that it's full of real life challenges that people will need to go through, exercises to reflect. And I'm wondering, maybe you don't want to give too much away, but I'm wondering, you said it starts with understanding yourself. Could you give our listeners an example of a real life challenge maybe they'll go through in the workbook? They can, so they can imagine how practical the book is actually going to be to reflect on their experiences or on their careers.
Yes,
Could you give
I'm
us an
so
example?
excited to. So a big part of writing this book is I wanted to have impact. I am a very practical person, and and even the biotech industry, like I'm always like, what is the impact of what we're doing? I want to develop therapies. I want to make a difference in patients' lives. And so when I started writing this book, I said I want this to be as real as possible. I wanted to come alive for folks, and I wanted to help them on their journey of breaking those limiting thought patterns and beliefs and that conditioning that we experience. So that's why I decided early on, and through even feedback I had gotten from friends who were working, were kind of giving me advice on this journey, like, you can create an accompanying workbook and journal to go along with this. Because I was summarizing the key points at the end of each chapter, kind of your takeaways. And I taught end each chapter with step into your power. And these are the helpful tools, resources, things that you can do, to make it practical. But the journal, I think, is such an amazing, part of the journey, because there's something about getting out of your head and onto paper. There's actually research that shows journaling can really be a cognitive enhancer and enabler, and promote neuroplasticity, and be more effective in breaking habits and reforming and basically creating new habits, new thought patterns. And so there's something that I think can be amplified by handwriting journaling, even more than typing. But in any case, any awareness exercises I think would be helpful. So in the first, but for every chapter, there is an accompanying chapter in the journal that has journaling prompts. It's actually one per day if you want to keep to that schedule. And then there are exercises at the end of each chapter also. So for example, there are journaling prompts that really are asking you, did you go through a difficult situation? Write about that. But more importantly, write about what was going on inside of you. What thoughts were you having? Just to raise awareness of that again, like taking a moment to actually think about, because a lot of times things happen and we just kind of gloss over it and we're like, oh, well, I felt so uncomfortable, but I don't even know why. And I'm not going to even pay attention to that. It's making you pause and think and write about it. So what was happening for you at the time? What were the thoughts that you were having? Why were you having some of those thoughts, do you think? So just getting ourselves to pause, slow down, and reflect. Just reflecting and building awareness of what's going on in our bodies and our minds, I think is such an important first step. Because I didn't even realize, even till late in my career, even when I had multiple successes, how much I was operating from this place of fear. How I was so afraid of failure. And I was caught in this prison of perfectionism. And at some point it really starts to hold you back, because fear is, obviously it propels you in some ways because you're always striving. I remember at McKinsey, we talked about the ideal candidate to work at McKinsey is an insecure overachiever, because you're just constantly striving, and, that's the kind of people they want, because you're going to work really hard. But at some point, it actually limits your ability to be an amazing leader. And it's actually no way to live your life. because if you're in the prison of perfectionism, you're trying to be the perfect wife, perfect mother, perfect leader. There's no such thing, first of all. And it actually inhibits, stops you from being your vulnerable, authentic self. And that's really truly where true power comes from.
And can I ask, because so let's say you have had your own book back in the days and were raised in a society and you experienced racism, but then whether or not you had the book, but then arriving in a biopharma organization, whatever, shouldn't that, whether or not you have done the homework on self-awareness, but shouldn't that organization be a great equalizer? Because then we don't care where you come from or what you've done. We just need your brain to be a chief medical officer, trial designs and whatnot. So how did you experience that? I guess it was not the great equalizer showing. So what was that experience actually? What happens in that environment?
It's a great question. I would love for all of us to think about it actually, because it's been so persistent for so long in terms of looking at the data. So when you are looking at, for example, graduating classes of graduate students or medical students, it's often more women. It's 50 plus women who are graduating from prestigious institutions, universities, programs. I was in those classes as well. My mother was a gold medalist in her medical school in India. At that time, though, very small percentage were women, but obviously very talented and brilliant. And then you enter into the workplace and these large corporations, and there is 50% women. I mean, it's pretty balanced. But as you go to the higher levels of leadership, there's that attrition that occurs. And, and then the question is like, what's happening there? Like, why are women opting out, or are they dropping out? And there have been multiple studies that have been conducted, some by McKinsey, some by Lean-In, the Lean-In organization, Sheryl Sandberg organization, like doing a lot of research and doing it together, talking about there's obviously challenges in childcare, things of that nature, but there's also a lot of microaggressions that are occurring and difficult work environments and all these things that are leading women to like not be promoted and also potentially drop out or opt out because it just gets very challenging at some point. So, I don't necessarily have like the full direct answer, but you do see the data. And you have less and less women in those leadership roles. And then you get to the CEO level. And for Fortune 500 companies, it's still 10% or less. The most recent data is 8%. And women shares in the biotech industry is less than 5%. So, you see this occur and you see the biggest, I think, drops when you get to those executive levels. C levels and then CEOs and then board directors. So there is something that's occurring. So you would think, it doesn't matter what someone's background is. It doesn't matter if they're, what gender they are, what diverse, what ethnic background, any of those things. And you want diversity of perspectives and you want people who are super smart that can figure things out. But there is something that is happening. There's conscious and unconscious biases, microaggressions, things that are happening in our industry. And selection standards that are continuing to influence, this dynamic. And you can just look at the top 10 pharma right now. There are no women in that list.
I actually think it's top 20 right now that there is no woman.
And just looking at the odds and we're up, you're right. We're brilliant. We are absolutely capable of doing these roles. I think there's no doubt about that.
And if we could somehow artificially imagine that thought experiment could remove those barriers, do you believe would it then equalize or be 50-50? And all layers, is it actually that some women decide not to go there, that they have different preference? So how much is preference and how much is actually those barriers? Do you dare speculate? Of course, we don't know.
No, I talk about this in my TED Talk. I mean, there's been studies to show that, 80% of women want to be promoted. And for women of color, it's even more. 88% of us want to be promoted. So it's not that like we're not leaning in. I've been leaning in fully in my whole career. I'm more than leaning in, right? But I was told many times that I wasn't the right person for that role, and I wasn't clear why. And I think, and I almost started believing them, and really I didn't. And I kept pushing, so you're like fighting, you have to believe in yourself. And I kept believing in myself. And I thought I could do this. I've been told I would never be the external spokesperson for a company, that I wasn't the right
Yeah.
fit to be a therapeutic area head. I've had this dialogue. I have had people tell me these things directly. And I got to this point where sometimes I start believing that narrative. Like, okay, well, again, maybe this is all as high as I'll go. Maybe I'm not a good
Yeah.
drug developer. I thought I was. I thought I understood. God, I'm a Harvard trained physician. I've been at McKinsey, UC at Stanford. Like I've worked with the best. What maybe I'm not capable of doing these things. Absolutely not. That's not the truth. Thankfully, I found people and leaders and companies that supported me along my journey, and that helped me to thrive. So that I was able to really fully address those questions, even in my own mind, where I don't have doubts now about that. I've worked on multiple drugs. I've developed drugs. I've gotten them approved. I have raised lots of money. I've been involved with exits. I mean, I don't have doubts now about my ability to, develop therapeutics or run companies and start them. But it's taken me a lot to get to this point, and I had a lot of doubt along the way. I just think I just have this fire to keep on going.
Can I ask, Sheila, because now you of course mentioned that it's very important to find a person that, now I maybe say it in a different way, that believes in you and helps you, promotes you on the way up, right? How important do you find it, or did you find it in your career to find that kind of person that believes in you? And I mean, of course, now you are, as Simone said, and also you outlined in your experience, you are now an established executive, had a lot of experiences. I assume you also had a lot of opportunities to help other people. How important is that to have that person
I think it's
in your career?
critical, and not that we want to be externally seeking validation and approval. I don't want to say that, because I'm very conscious of that, being a strong people pleaser myself. And also knowing that I have been seeking that external validation. I've been trying to fit in and belong. That's not what I'm saying. The book starts out with a Maya Angelou quote: "You alone are enough. You have nothing to prove to anyone." And I think, it's so important to start from that place, because it's so hard for us to really internalize that and believe it and know it. But that is the truth. My advice to my younger self was believe in yourself. You got this. You can figure it out. But then my advice now to my younger self was, you don't have to do it alone. Build your network, find people who do believe in you, because it's very difficult to do it alone, especially when you get into more and more challenging situations. So I think it's so critical. And I think I think that's really one of my big lessons in terms of helping to build this biotech CEO sisterhood. It's such a wonderful community of women lifting each other up, and we celebrate each other's accomplishments. And we're there when our companies and our programs fail, to pick ourselves back up and help us be resilient. And we're sharing information and advice one another. And it's so empowering. It's such an enabler. If I could bottle up that energy and give it to everybody in a pill that we take once a day, I would, because it's such a phenomenal feeling to feel safe, understood, and that you belong and you don't have to prove yourself. I think, it's again, like, as I mentioned, it's a game changer. So I do think that these things are really important. I think maybe people take it for granted, but for those of us who haven't had it, I think it is so eye-opening when you first experience it, when you say, "Oh, wow, this is what a good relationship feels like. This is what it feels like to work in a really positive, safe environment, work environment, home environment." Like, I think when you experience that, you're like, "Oh, I'll never go back. Now I know this is my new normal." So I'm talking about in the book for the younger generations, like, don't wait. Start building that network early on in your career. Not again to seek approval or validation, but to help you have your own back. We have to have our own back, and I think it's so important, but we need help along the journey too, and you don't have to do it alone. And I try to do that for others, help them see themselves, for men and women. I feel like everyone has their brilliance and the best parts of them, but like, let's work together to help every individual person shine.
So that CEO sisterhood, I guess that's only for females, I guess. So that's so how should males or people help? So I think that if you look at the relationship between the ability and the confidence, it takes very little ability in the male before the confidence goes up to a very, very high level. And I've seen among let's say, female team members that even at a high ability, they have lower confidence. I don't know if it's a biological or hormonal, whatever it is, in males that they are a little bit off. Is that a real mechanism you think? What should males actually do in the workplace?
It's such a great question. I mean, we're all in this together and we can't do it alone. I mean, allyship is so critically important. And that's how we're going to make a change. And what the sisterhood that, we've been talking about this so much. I mean, first we wanted to get together just to support one another because it was important for us because we were, the few, and, we would see each other at investor conferences or banking conferences, and there'd be a few of us in the room, and we'd be looking at, each other, and we didn't have enough time to get together or talk with one another. Many of us have had amazing male mentors and sponsors. I mean, all of us have, because that's who sponsored and mentored us. So we are all so grateful to those people who saw our capabilities and who believed in us and lifted us up. And the thought is, how do we lift ourselves up, and how do we not compete with one another? And I think many of us thought we had to be competitive with one another, and that was coming from a lack mindset. So we really wanted to change that dynamic also, to understand that we can lift each other up while we're climbing and have an abundant mindset. So I think that was just so important. But now we really want to work with men and our allies everywhere, and to make this difference and see how can we kind of break these barriers internally and externally together. So I really appreciate this question, and we want to do more as a sisterhood together with and bring men in everywhere we can. It's meant to be really inclusive, not exclusive at all. So I just want to give an update on the sisterhood. So we are actually in the process of forming a nonprofit. And we are forming the CXO sisterhood so that every C-level executive can have a community as well. And then as CEOs, we can help promote that C-level executive, like CFO, CMO, CSO, to be and inspire them to be CEOs, that we believe in them and that they can be CEOs. And then we hoping that group will also bring in directors and the lower levels and get them into the executive positions, and the VPs and senior VPs, and get into C levels too. So we're kind of continuing to cascade it down, and then again work with our male allies and peers to help us do this together. So I think that's the other aspect here. And so for your question, I mean, my whole thought is just pay attention to it. Like the first step I feel in addressing any change or thinking about change is just raising awareness, so that when men are just looking around and saying, oh, how do your peers feel? Are there a lot of women around? Are they not? Just maybe they're a little uncomfortable, but sometimes there are remarks made, and there's no one commented on the remarks, but we all kind of know that wasn't exactly the best remark. I think we've all been in those situations, and is that person feeling? Is it a safe environment for these people to speak up or not? How can I help that person? Make them feel more comfortable. Oftentimes, we talk about at the board level, especially if there's only one woman in the room, we'll make a comment, but we're not really listened to. And so another male, we can say a comment we made, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, oh, that's a good comment. You're like, well, I just made that 10 minutes ago. We call it mansplaining. We're like, what's happening here? But then we've seen but when there are 2 women or 3 women in the room. Recently, we met with Suzanne Brown, who was at the New York Stock Exchange, who's involved with getting diverse talent onto Fortune 500 New York Stock Exchange boards. And she says that the studies have shown it's not 1 or 2 women, it's when 3 women are in the room where there's changes in dynamics. So oftentimes we can amplify one another. Let's go back to what, Sheila said, or let's go back to what so-and-so said. And I've done this proactively for women executives. I'll say, well, I would love to hear what, this person as the chief medical officer or as a chief business officer has to say about that. And I gave them the platform to speak at the board level. And they'll come back to me and say, when you did that, it changed everything for me. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. Because once I did that, the other board members saw her in a different light. And I've helped to shift that narrative around her, or not the narrative, the dynamic, so that she stepped fully power. And she's like, yeah, I am the CMO of this company. And I am the expert, and I'm going, and I'm like, the most important person in my perspective to opine on this issue is the CMO. And so please take the floor. What do you think? So I think, there's so much we can do as men and women to raise awareness, support. And then I would ask every male leader to actively sponsor women. Not
Yeah.
just mentor them, but actively sponsor them. Like look for opportunities to bring them up and mentor them also in that process. And watch
Yeah.
out. Maybe they're trying to figure it out because again, we haven't had the networks and we haven't done it before. Help them in that process and try to set them up for success. So
And I think you gave, and of course we await that there will be at least 3 women in every leadership meeting, but I think you gave very practical advice for every male participant in the meetings there, that you said by drawing attention to what women in the meetings are saying, because I think it's quite common mechanism that, as you say, that for some reason it doesn't carry the same weight or perceived or whatever, or it's overheard, or males tend to maybe over talk or talk louder or whatever. So I think, and that's very easy to correct that. And I think it's also non-aggressive in the sense it's pretty easy to do in the meeting. So if we think about the talent and this podcast, we are very sort of very rational, very pragmatic about things. We just want to have higher return on investment, more drugs coming out of the pipeline. So, and then we see that, okay, very, very few women sit at the very top and in the board. So we're missing out on almost half of the talent mass. Is not optimal. It could be better. So why isn't that someone, venture capital or whatever, say, but listen, we don't care where you come from, how you look, whatever. We just want that, your leadership skills and whatever. And then it becomes a competitive edge. I mean, how can you afford to run organizations like that?
yeah, and I think that is happening. I think there's amazing venture partners and investors who very much have that mindset. Like they want the smartest, strongest, most experienced leaders in a specific area, or they see that talent and they're using it. And I have wonderful investor colleagues who are tapping into terrific women leaders and supporting them and have no issues with that. They don't think about it. I don't see
Yeah.
any bias really. So there are definitely people out there. And honestly, when you look at the successes this year alone, 2025, look at what our women CEOs are doing. And we're celebrating this so much in the sisterhood. Intracellular therapeutics, Blueprint Medicines, Vigil, 8RX Pharmaceuticals, where I was chair and Jen Lee was a CEO, is a CEO. Amazing deal with AbbVie. Public financings, Heather Turner at LB Pharma, Sarah Boyce at Avidity, doing such a huge follow-on finance. I mean, we are really doing so well in our industry, and we're paving the way. Heather was the first IPO in a long time. It's really amazing what we're doing, and those women are absolutely, just revered and highly sought after. Laura Shawver with Capstan Therapeutics. Really, like it's just I can go on and on and on. It's been amazing. So just to put a lot of just names out there for our audience, so important about what women are doing in our ecosystem in a very meaningful way. Some of the biggest acquisitions and the biggest financings this year. So yes, absolutely, we're doing so much, and investors see that. And again, these people are highly sought after and supported. But I think we just need more of that, just more and more and more of it. And I do think there was a little bit of that retrenching, with some of the challenges, in the, as you know, in the broader geopolitical ecosystem, and who investors want to support, especially when, companies are going public. I've also seen people say like, well, let's swap this person out and put someone of a different phenotype in that leadership position because they think maybe they can raise more money or they could do more deals. And I just think also there's this aspect of just because men have been in those leadership positions for longer periods of time and they have those networks, they've had those successes, you just have a bigger pool of, them to like go, for investors to kind of go back to, or, executives to pull upon. And I think we're developing that and we're growing that. And that's true for women. That's true for people of different minority backgrounds, whether that's Asians or, Latinx or, the Black populations as well. Like we're all doing it and we're advancing it. We just need to kind of accelerate that and amplify it so that we can get to the more diversity, because there is so much diverse talent and we absolutely want to tap into that talent pool to be the best. And we know that diversity and good cultures drive performance. The data is, unequivocal. We know that. So we just have to embrace it and actually make it happen.
But isn't it like, every pharma company and so on, they love to talk about diversity, right? Whether it's neurodiversity or it's, other types of handicaps or color, whatever. But I mean, but you also see the statistics. You can just go to any pharma company's website and see what the board composition and executive team composition. So then looking ahead, I mean, can we just sit and wait maybe to that the old generation expires and then there'll be a new wave of people, maybe, I mean, both male and female brought up in a different context, and then eventually then it'll be critical mass because you obviously have a huge momentum also around what you do and the sisterhood. So when will the numbers change? Because not like we see that's a hockey stick maybe in the board compositions and so on yet.
Well, if anything, it's actually kind of taken a little bit of a step back this year. If you look at the numbers. So, we track these numbers. So there was a lot of legislation here in the U.S. That was supporting more diversity. And we're actually seeing, since that was struck down, we're seeing that women board directors and women chair numbers are actually dropping. And definitely not increasing. And then again, the women CEOs also, those numbers are dropping for especially that Fortune 100 and Fortune 500 companies. So yeah, it's a good question. And I think that's why we have to keep at it. And we've made a lot of progress. And I think that's really wonderful to celebrate. I wanted to shout out, and give those examples because they're so real and amazing and just so inspiring, and we need to be inspired. But we do have work to do. And I think that's why we did form the sisterhood, to say, how can we address this more directly? How can we set ourselves up for success as well? And do more to amplify that and build those networks. We have to do more network building. At the end of the day, a lot of these decisions in terms of who's promoted and how business development deals are done, they are based on relationships. They're based on relationships and trust and who you know and where you feel safe and who you're comfortable with. And that's why we have to make sure that we have access to the same ecosystem so we can build those relationships so that when we call someone, because we have some exciting data, they're going to actually know who we are. They trust us. There's credibility there, and there's a long-standing relationship. Because in the absence of that, you're basically at a disadvantage versus someone who has done several deals, and that's why they keep getting these opportunities. And so, there's that reinforcement. And so you do need to develop those relationships, and you need to have that trust and credibility. So how do we build that? And there has to be some proactive, intentional network building on all of our, behalf that we need to pursue.
Maybe just a quick question to it. So how do you compare the biopharma industry with other industries? For instance, like the tech industry and, AI. I mean, I recently saw the Open AI Developer Day. I know, of course, it's almost marketing as well, but then you have Asian female leaders presenting on stage. There's a huge talent mass there. We see that's completely natural. So is that an example of an area where it's already works nicely? Probably not, but how do you compare biopharma to other industries?
It's a good question. And I'm not as well versed with the data from the other industries. I do hear a lot about the tech bro culture and some of the challenges that women have had in that industry. And so, and I've been hearing it even for the younger generations who are kind of explaining this to me. I often get called by fathers who just want me to try to help their daughters because they come out of graduate school and then they go into the corporate world and they're like, oh my God, what's happening? No one's listening to me. And people are stealing my projects and they're getting overrun and they don't even understand what's happening. So, but I can say, it seems like with fintech, it seems like with the investor communities, when you look at managing partners and who's making the decision at investment firms and biotech and elsewhere, banking industry, the law firms, I think you can see it pretty clearly that there's still not as much female representation, as we'd like. I don't know the latest statistics about the tech world. It's great to see, these demographics and definitely a lot of diversity. It seems like in tech, there's a lot of diversity in terms of, again, different backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds, gender, things like that, that we're seeing, showcased. I just don't know the numbers.
What advice would you give to the male leaders out there, or males out there in some position of power, whatever, whether it's a venture capital fund or if it's a biopharma organization? So what exactly is it that we should do? What initiatives or ways of working? How should we do it?
Yes, I really just recommend just simple things because I'm a big believer in simple steps, baby steps, simple steps, and then growing from there, not just stopping there. But I think again, like take action today. All of us can be mirrors for everyone in our lives. That's not defined by the way someone looks. When you believe, see, hear, understand someone, believe in them, have their back, you are a mirror for that person. And whether that's your loved one, your spouse, partner, mother, daughter, loved one, friends, again, we all have people that we can be mirrors for. So starting in your immediate community, it's amazing. Again, I mentioned fathers really supporting their daughters. I love that. And doing that in a different way, showing up for them in a different way. You can show up for the women in your life in a different way and to people with different backgrounds in a different way. So just raising that awareness that maybe they're having a different experience than you are. Maybe they're coming at it from a different place and just at least having that acknowledgement that they may not feel as comfortable as you do in certain situations and being mindful of that. And when some things are said that maybe, that could be perceived as a challenging kind of statement or comment, addressing it, not letting it slide, like just doing more to be aware of the environment and the surroundings, but just actively helping people around them. And so starting with your loved ones, broadening that out to your colleagues, your peers, your employees, people in your organizations, and people who you believe in. Like when you see someone a woman or again, a person with a different background who's just so impressive, tell them and maybe try to help them. We believe in organic relationships. We talk about this at the sisterhood as well. Like you can't force things, you can't force mentoring and sponsorship. It just have to be organic. But when you are seeing something brilliant in someone or seeing a potential and promise in someone, you can do something about it. You can tell them, even telling them opens up their eyes. Like they may see themselves differently. So be generous in your comments and support and celebrating people's accomplishments. And then if you can, offer them some direct help because it'll be so valuable and it could be game changing, life changing for that person. And again,
I think it
start
makes
with just a few people and take it from there. But and hopefully that'll be a very rewarding relationship for you. I think I know for myself, mentoring and sponsoring is the gift that keeps on giving back to me, the sisterhood. That we've done a lot over the last 4 or 5 years to develop and build it all just basically, with our own effort. But it's just been such a beautiful, transformative experience for me personally. So I do believe in contribution and giving, and that's a means of growth for all of us.
Are you familiar with any organization where you say they have the perfect setup or some initiative or whatever that actually moves the needle? Is that a thing, or is it almost like we had the D and I wave and that sort of came and then it went a bit away? So, but what about the female leadership thing? Is there any company who really cracked the nut because whether they want to do the right thing or just because they realize this is a competitive edge, so that's why we're doing it?
Well, I think there's some examples of companies that just are doing really well. And I think, of course, I look to companies that are led by women. Because some of them I think there is more like diversity at the board level, at the executive team level. I mean, I was, obviously I look to Yvonne Greenstreet and Reshma Keller-Ramani at Vertex and Alnylam as great organizations. I've interviewed Yvonne about this, and I think I think with John Roaring Nuri and Yvonne, I think Greenstreet, I think they're just amazing leaders who just have embraced diversity all along. So I think there's a lot of diversity at Alnylam. At least I can I can comment on that, and how important it is for them because they really honor diversity of thought and perspective. So it's not it's something that kind of naturally organically occurs. There's a number like I was just sponsored by Deloitte that did an event for us, and I think they have a tremendous amount of diversity up and down their organization. I think that's a terrific example of an organization that's doing really well. I do look to Genentech. I think that's I had spent time in my career there, but I do think having women leaders at the helm and at least for that part of the organization, I think is really amazing. So I think that there's examples in our industry that we can look to. There's a number of organizations that are supporting women in, getting board level roles and helping them with their executive leadership. There's Women in
Mhm.
Bio that's, does a lot of mentoring and board work, and they have a board readiness program. So kind of a shout out to them. Obviously doing anything with the biotech CXO sisterhoods, we'd welcome any
Yeah.
partnerships or collaborations for anyone who's interested. So yeah, I think obviously there's organizations like Chief and, the female push, and like people are doing things that are broader than just biotech and pharma across industries. But yeah, just more to do, more to do. I don't know of anyone that's completely cracked this nut, but I think, there's organizations that are trying to support women leaders.
Where would a male CEO, for instance, go if he needed advice? Is there some kind of way to get advice somehow?
Yeah.
Let's say you were to, okay, I'm going to recruit a new CMO. Is a resource?
Oh, Simone, I love these questions. This is great. So practical. The biotech sisterhood has a LinkedIn. You can just message us. We're literally creating lists of, excellent female candidates for every C-level position. So we have, and that's part of what we've been doing. Like, because sometimes we hear, well, we're looking for someone with a different background, and we're like, we have 10, like, or hundreds actually. So CFO, CMO, CSO, CEO candidates, let us know. We'd be happy to come up and give you ideas and, and put you in touch with great talent. So yes, absolutely. And I have had people reach out and ask for candidates, and we do have lists that we can send over and make connections. So we have a LinkedIn, and anyone can message us there, and we will absolutely respond and try to be helpful.
That's absolutely cool. We might try to see if we can exploit the system for maybe a future podcast guest. But I'll hand it over to you, Martin, to wrap up.
Oh, I think it's also a very nice way to close. Just reach out to the biotech sisterhood, and they might help you find your next leader, woman leader, so we can lift up the numbers.
So remind our listeners again, what is your book called? When will it come out? Why should we read it?
Yes, my book is called The Mirror Effect, a transformative approach for growth for the next generation of women leaders. And it's available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. My publisher Amplifies a bookstore. Feel free to go to my website, SheilaGujrathiMD.com, and you can pre-order it there, or just go directly to the retail sites. And feel free to get the book and the journal. It's also a great gift. I'm encouraging people to do the gift, to do the book and the journal in a peer group or a book club, so they don't have to do it by themselves. And this way they can have a lot of discussion and dialogue about, what this means and grow together.
Is it only for women, or can it also be read by
Of
men?
course. No, it's really meant to be inclusive. As you know, you do try to target certain demographics because, that's the advice you get in the publishing world, which has been a whole new
Mhm.
set of experiences for me. But I did write this book to be as inclusive as possible. So I talked to my, the men as well in the book, because again, I just think just raising the awareness, and I have had wonderful men read my book and leaders in our industry, and I think they really enjoyed it. A lot of it is best practices on leadership, frankly. I ask men, do you have an inner critic? We all have inner critics. And so, a lot of this is very common. It's just, I think I really wanted to focus it, stories around women, just because I think, just to make it very relatable. But absolutely, everything I talk about, I think is really, it can be relevant for any leader.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think a book is a very affordable piece of training for an organization. So maybe recommend leadership teams out there, maybe distribute it and then discuss it in your teams. That's probably a very good thing you could do for your organization. If our listeners want to get in touch with you, Sheila, how do you prefer they do that?
The best way is through LinkedIn. It's, a great way. Try to get through all the DMs, the direct messaging that I get. So please reach out on LinkedIn and follow me on LinkedIn and social media. I'm on really most social media channels, and I have a newsletter that I release every month that tries to go through a relevant topic and continue again with the lessons learned. I'm trying to really democratize this, and again, I
Mhm.
had the benefit of having several executive coaches, and but I know sometimes it's really expensive, so I'm trying to get a lot of that learning out.
Mhm.
For especially even maybe people who can't afford that type of executive, just make it really alive and helpful for them.
But thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and we hope to see you back in a few years' time, and then we hope this statistics looks much better for the industry.
Let's all work
With the
that together. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for being part of this journey, and I really have loved being here today.
A pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
So, Simone, this was our conversation with Sheila. What did you take away, as always?
So it shows that there's so much room for improvement, and it's such an unfair world. By now, you and I, we know that the industry is not running in a perfect manner, neither when it comes to cycle time, probability of success, and definitely not when it comes to equality in leadership positions. So I think that is frustrating, but also in frustration, there's also energy, and there's definitely a tremendous room for improvement here for those organizations who are ready to seize the opportunity. If we make one simple split in the population, there should be 2 talent pools, 1 men, 1 women. If you then took all the women, or maybe all underrepresented voices, and ranked them according to skill, then the top of that talent pool, that should be some of the best people in the entire world. It's already a diminishing return if you keep putting less skilled males in the positions of power and leadership. What did you take away?
As you could see, I was fairly quiet during the interview. I think it was, at some points, it was almost hard to listen to. She specifically mentioned sometimes it just helps so much if you just give a word in the meeting to someone who would not be expected to talk. When I started my career and I was in a room full of much more senior people, it is sometimes so hard to just start to speak up because you think you are not as good as all those experienced people. And just for someone to sit there and say, hey, what do you think? It just all of a sudden opens up all the opportunities. I'm not in any way going to say that I had it as hard as some of these underrepresented minorities, but I can really now, especially now after the conversation, see how they could make such a huge difference.
We're all blind to our biases to some extent. It's probably hard-coded in many organizations. The leadership pathways and how leaders are recruited must be so much biased. We tend to look for what was successful last time, and then we see if we can find a copy. We've been talking about psychological safety, diversity, equity, inclusion, cognitive diversity, neurodiverse workforce. And here we are, and you can just look up the web pages of the companies and see none of them basically is doing what they preach. One thing is what is the right thing to do. So we're not doing what is the right thing to do. At least it's not reflected in the statistics. The other thing would be to do what is the best for the company and return on investment. And we're also not doing that. Again, humans are ruining the organizations to some extent.
I really like your perspective. You said it now, but you also said it during the interview. If you think of all the groups, all the talent pools you're not tapping into, because it's not just males and females, right? It's minorities, it's people of color, people maybe of different religions. If you then add up all those pools that you are not tapping into and all the talent you're missing out on, it's very hard to argue how you would not be losing returns on investment and other efficiencies.
Those who are able to do it, they will be the winners in the future. We can do better as an industry, and we know that it's not doing too well if we look at return on investment. And maybe part of the reason is the composition of the leadership.
Just before this recording, Simone, we were doing some thought exercises of random companies and how their executive management look like, right? Not to name any specific, but you will see many companies where maybe there is 0 women in the executive management, or it's 1 out of 9, 2 out of 10. The numbers really aren't great. So, I mean, it's not, you don't have to go very far to find out that the numbers are not great.
Even in Scandinavia, why is the system so broken? Nobody is complaining. The shareholders, they can just say, we want a 50-50 split. No one does it, right? So it just perpetuates itself. Middle-aged, white male, that's the archetype. But again, females, people of color, handicapped, people, whatnot. The industry is not walking the talk. It's just prestige projects you're running and putting on your websites.
In one way, right, that with all of these biases, the first thing is you need to be aware of it. But even if you are aware, that doesn't necessarily mean you are doing the right things.
So what are you going to do on Monday?
That's a tough question, but I'll probably, going back to almost in the beginning of this discussion, I'll focus more on making sure that no matter who is in the room, I think everyone should be given a chance to talk, whether it's the seniority, whether it's gender, no matter what it is.
I'll just add here at the end, of course, there's still a long way to go if you look at the statistics, and if we project it forward, we can see it's going to take many years before there's an equal gender distribution. But also pay attention to all the fabulous biotech deals and so on out there. And you can see that many of these companies are run by very successful female leaders. Hopefully the snowball is rolling down the hill and is building momentum. With that, let's end it here.
If you know of an inspirational story or of an inspirational female leader, or not just female, of any other potential minority, just let us know, because we would like to bring them on to make sure that these voices start to be represented.
Absolutely. And again, check out our LinkedIn page. Just search for Cures and Capital and like and subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.